Welcome to Story Craft Portal, where every story is not just a tale, but an emotion, a truth, and a journey that touches the soul. Today's story is one of heartbreak, injustice, and unimaginable endurance. A man wrongfully imprisoned for 38 years for a murder he didn't commit. Imagine spending nearly 4 decades behind bars, watching life pass you by, knowing you're innocent, and yet the world believes otherwise. This is the haunting story of Peter Sullivan, who was accused of killing 21-year-old barmaid Diane Sindall in 1987. But now, after 38 long years, shocking new DNA evidence has emerged, and everything is about to change. The year was 1987. The streets of Bebington were quiet, wrapped in a chilling fog that seemed to whisper secrets into the dark. Diane Sindall, a 21-year-old barmaid full of dreams and fire, was driving home after her shift, unaware that fate was about to turn cruel. Her van ran out of petrol on a lonely stretch of road, and in those few minutes of isolation, she vanished into the shadows forever. The next morning, her lifeless body was found nearby, strangled, bruised, and silenced. The town erupted in fear, grief, and suspicion. The police moved swiftly, maybe too swiftly, and all eyes turned to a local man with a troubled past, Peter Sullivan. Within weeks, he was arrested, tried, and convicted. But what if they got it wrong? What if the real killer watched quietly from a distance, smiling as Peter's world fell apart? You think this is over? It's just the beginning. Peter Sullivan had always been an outsider, quiet, reclusive, misunderstood. He had a minor record for petty theft, nothing violent, but in a town desperate for justice, he was the perfect fit for a killer. The police claimed he had no alibi, and a single witness said they saw him near the scene. That was enough. In court, the prosecution painted him as a monster, feeding off the grief in the room. Peter kept pleading innocent, his voice breaking, but no one listened. Not the jury, not the judge, not even his own lawyer, who seemed rushed and indifferent. His family shrank away in shame. The town whispered in disgust, and Peter was sentenced to life behind bars. But behind the bars, he didn't break. He remembered every detail, every inconsistency. And deep inside, he knew one thing for certain. Someone out there was hiding the truth, and they weren't done yet. Prison wasn't just punishment for Peter, it was erasure. Days bled into nights, and the calendar lost all meaning. He spent years in silence, observing, remembering, and waiting. While others gave in to the chaos, Peter held onto one thing: the truth. In moments of quiet, he replayed that night like a broken reel. The news clippings, the screams of Diane's family in court, the way evidence was skipped, questions never asked. He began writing letters to lawyers, journalists, anyone who might listen. Most went unanswered. But one day, a young law student named Maya replied. She was curious, skeptical, but something about Peter's words felt wrong. Not guilty wrong, system wrong. She agreed to visit. That visit changed everything. Maya noticed what no one else did. And in Peter's hopeless eyes, she saw something chilling. The possibility that an innocent man had been buried alive by the justice system. Maya started digging. At first, it was out of curiosity. Then it became obsession. She found police records, trial transcripts, old news articles, and the deeper she went, the more the cracks began to show. Key evidence had been dismissed, like the partial fingerprint on Diane's van that didn't match Peter. A second witness, who claimed they saw someone else fleeing the scene, was never called. Most shocking of all, the forensic testing was rushed, limited by 1980s technology. Maya contacted a DNA lab and asked if the preserved evidence could be retested with modern methods. They agreed. Weeks passed. Peter tried not to hope. Then the results came. It wasn't Peter's DNA under Diane's nails, it was someone else's. A name the police never mentioned. And now, Maya faced a terrifying question. If the real killer was never caught, where had he been hiding all these years? The DNA matched a man named Alan Krauss, a drifter with a violent record who was questioned briefly in 1987, then released without a second glance. At the time, his story Didn't add up, but he vanished before further inquiry. Maya took the evidence to the Innocence Project, and suddenly, Peter's case exploded into the media. Headlines screamed, "Wrong man jailed." Protests followed. Peter was moved into protective custody as threats and sympathy flooded in. But Alan? He was nowhere to be found. Some believed he died. Others whispered he'd never left town. Maya began receiving cryptic warnings. "Leave it alone," one note read. Fear crept in, but she refused to stop. Meanwhile, Peter sat in his cell, heart racing. For the first time in 38 years, he felt something strange. Not just hope, danger, because the real killer now knew he was being hunted. And killers don't like to be found. Alan Krause's trail was ice cold, but Maya wasn't giving up. She traced old addresses, dug through public records, even interviewed people who'd lived near him in the 80s. A pattern emerged. Alan had a history of violence toward women, and he'd moved frequently, always after an incident. Maya handed this to the legal team, who pushed for Peter's conviction to be re-examined. Meanwhile, Peter sat through meetings with lawyers and journalists, all trying to understand how this could happen. He was older now, quieter, but inside the fire still burned. One night, Maya received a call from a retired officer. Anonymous, nervous, but willing to talk. "We were told to drop Alan." Higher-ups said Sullivan was a cleaner story. The system hadn't failed. It had chosen convenience over truth. And if Alan was still out there, he had 38 years to disappear. Or worse, prepare for the day someone came looking. The deeper Maya dug, the more haunting the trail became. Alan's name surfaced in another unsolved case. A waitress killed in 1985 under eerily similar circumstances. The method, the injuries, even the missing items all echoed Diane's case. Maya shared the findings with police, but resistance grew. Some officers feared exposure, others protected reputations. Meanwhile, Peter's mental state wavered. Though hopeful, he couldn't forget the years stolen from him. Nightmares of Diane's screams haunted him, though he'd never heard them. Then a breakthrough, a woman stepped forward. She'd dated Alan briefly in the 90s. She remembered his violent outbursts and the time he muttered something in his sleep. She screamed so loud that night. The police could no longer ignore the evidence. An active manhunt for Alan Krause was launched. But Alan wasn't hiding. He was waiting, and the past wasn't buried. It was awake and watching. Police tracked Alan to a remote cabin in North Wales, abandoned for years, but recently disturbed. Inside, chilling items were found. Newspaper clippings about Diane's case, surveillance photos of Maya, and a list of names with Peter's circled in red. The air tightened with dread. Maya was placed under protection, but she refused to stop. Peter's appeal date was finally announced. After nearly 4 decades, he would face the same courtroom, not as a convict, but as a man pleading for justice. But Alan wasn't done yet. 2 days before the hearing, Maya's car was found vandalized. Her tires slashed, a red X spray painted across her windshield. It wasn't just about clearing Peter's name anymore. It was about stopping a predator who had evaded justice for far too long. And in the quiet of the woods, Alan watched, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The courtroom buzzed as Peter was let in. No handcuffs this time. 38 years had carved lines into his face, but his eyes burned with the same truth he swore by decades ago. Maya sat in the gallery, nerves frayed but unwavering. She watched as new evidence was presented. DNA mismatches, flawed testimonies, Alan's resurfaced history. The retired officer testified, confirming the cover-up. Then, a gasp filled the courtroom. Alan Krause had been captured, found in a storage unit in Liverpool, trying to flee. He looked older, meaner, but not surprised. He smiled at Peter across the room, a grin that chilled everyone. The judge paused, visibly shaken. For Peter, the moment hung in the air like thunder waiting to fall. Decades of silence, shame, and isolation teetered on the edge of a single decision. The world held its breath. The system had one last chance to make this right. The judge's voice cracked as he read the verdict. Conviction overturned. "Mr. Sullivan, you are free." The courtroom erupted. Tears, applause, disbelief. Peter sat motionless, the words echoing in his ears. Free. After 38 years of stolen time, he stepped outside, greeted by sunlight he hadn't felt in decades. Maya stood beside him, tears on her cheeks. "You were never alone," she whispered. Alan was charged with Diane's murder and 2 other cold cases. His trial loomed, but for Peter, it no longer mattered. He had his life back, scarred, aged but his. He visited Diane's grave that night. "I'm sorry they failed you," he said, "but they won't again." And as he walked away from the darkness that once consumed him, Peter left behind a message etched in history, that even after a lifetime of silence, truth can still speak, and justice, though delayed, will answer.